Recording. All right, you're up.
And we need to see her slides. I live independently. Yeah. And my son lives there, so he can. I no longer drive.
Okay, good. All right, so you.
Good morning,
She can.
friends.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Barb Kreider. I'm one of the members of the Quaker crowd here. For those of you who are not Quakers, welcome to our meeting house. Usually after we worship on Sundays, we come over here, have some food, and then gather to learn from each other or learn from good friends who are willing to come and speak with us. This is very casual. If you want to get up, get food, and whatever, it's all good. Welcome so much, Shana. This is pretty amazing. To forget history is dishonoring those who have died, not only their tragedy, but also their vibrant lives. And so we gathered today to remember and to learn a story of remarkable courage and to think about not yet. Thank you.
I'll try to project. Just tell me if you can't hear me in the back. Okay. What an honor it is to be here today. Thank you for allowing me to come speak about my grandmother, Elizabeth Blum Goldstein. The reality of her past was too horrific for her to talk about, so she didn't. My grandmother always felt a sense of responsibility to share her experiences so others could learn from them, but she was tormented by the inability to do so. When I was in college in 2004, I asked my grandma if I could interview her for an independent study project. For me, she didn't say no. I had absolutely no idea of the trauma she would experience as she tried to share those memories with me. After each interview, she was out of commission for the rest of the day, sometimes days. Her blood pressure rose. She was physically and emotionally drained, but she tried her best to get through it for me. I'm here to speak to you about what my grandmother shared with me. She told me more than she's ever told anyone before, and in her words, it's only the tip of the iceberg. I'm here to share her experiences so her truth lives on. I think it will be most powerful if I speak her exact words so you can feel the emotion behind them. I was born on March 19th, 1926, in a small town called Kishar in Hungary. It was a normal life. We were a big family with 8 children. I had an older brother, Shandor. I was the second child, the oldest girl. I had 5 brothers and 2 sisters, Miklos, Ibolia, David, Miriam, Zoltan, and Samuel. I helped raise the children and prepare meals. My father, Martin, was often busy with the general store that we owned. We had orchards, fruit trees, wheat. My father was a wonderful man. The atmosphere was serious for as long as I could remember. We went to school until we weren't allowed anymore. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, we noticed that bad things were happening. The grown-ups heard rumors. I used to ask my father, what if the rumors are true? What will become of us? My father was very tall and very calm. He would put his hand on my head and say, don't worry about anything. Nothing is going to happen to us. We're good citizens. We've done nothing wrong. That made me feel good until I heard the rumors again, which never took long. In March 1944, someone came to the door and said Hitler came into Hungary. It was as if the strength went out of everybody. I remember watching the faces and I knew something was really bad, and it really was. They made us wear a yellow star so we would stand out in the crowd. About 2 or 3 weeks later, they began gathering all the Jewish people from Hungary. I asked my father if he could talk to his friends, the mayor, anyone with a position to help. He said they don't want to talk to me. They were probably afraid they would get in trouble, and so there was no one to turn to, no government to turn to, no single person to turn to. In April 1944, we were ordered from our home. Hungarian policemen were appointed to remove us. They put us on a horse and buggy to take us to a ghetto in Matzalka. I knew we were in trouble, and again I questioned my father. He said, "We'll be okay. They'll take us home in no time. You know, they're probably going to ask you some questions, and then we'll go home." I wanted to believe it. I remember we had a little dog, and the dog was running after us as we pulled away from our house because he was part of our family. He was running, and then one of the officers shot him. They took us to a part of the city that was barricaded. People arrived from all over. We had a room in an attic with 4 other families. There was no privacy. They had, I think, a soup kitchen every once in a while. We had brought some food. We had sugar cubes and some bread. Nobody knew what was going on. We were thinking that this is just temporary and then we're going to go back home and pick up our lives again, which never happened. We stayed here for about 4 to 6 weeks without knowing what our future was. We were then taken on foot to a train station, but it was not a train for people. These were trains used to transport cows and horses. There were no windows, just slits for air. It took hours when the soldiers ordered people onto the wagons. We saw people, Jewish people on stretchers who had been pulled out of hospitals. German soldiers were walking around with German shepherds. We were ordered onto the train and there was no room. We were like sardines standing up. Somebody called out, "There's no room." The soldier ordered the German shepherd to jump in at us. Of course, we all backed up and he said, "You see, you have room." Then they shoved a few chairs with dying people on them. There was an open pail in the corner and they said, "This is your toilet." When the doors closed on that train, I asked my father, "What's happening? What's going to become of us?" And I still see his face. He said to me, "I don't know anymore." And that's when I lost all my hopes, all my everything that kept me going. That stays with me. We traveled for about 3 days and nights. We never got off that train. The door was never opened. I had some sugar cubes in my pocket. There was no water, nothing. It was very hot. I remember horrible sounds. People were losing their minds. We arrived and we didn't know where. We were ordered off the train and they said, "Just keep moving." Then I saw the wrought iron sign, Arbeit macht frei, work free. Music was playing, I guess to cover up the sadness of what was really going on there. As we were walking, we passed a woman lying on her back, crying, screaming, moaning. We recognized her from the next town over from ours. We knew her family. She was the wife of our rabbi. She had 4 little children all around her crying. She was lying on the ground giving birth. She was begging for help, asking everybody, and we were ordered, "Schnell, schnell, quickly, quickly." Nobody could help her. And then I heard a shot. They let her give birth right on the street, and then they shot her. Many years later, when I was living in America, I met up with a rabbi I had known from Hungary. He asked if I knew if his wife had survived or what happened to her. I told him I didn't know anything. I didn't have the heart to tell him what happened. After we passed the rabbi's wife in Auschwitz, we walked for quite a while and then came up to these long tables where Germans were sitting. Here, they registered us. I held hands with my younger sister, who was 13 years old. After they registered us, they made us go in different directions. My mother was ordered to the right. She had 4 children with her. Later, I learned she was sent to the gas chamber with the younger children right then and there. She was 44 years old. That was the end of them, but I didn't know it at the time. My father, my older brother, and my younger brother were sent to walk straight. I remember that I took some sugar cubes out of my pocket and ran to my father and put them into his pocket. This was the last time I ever saw them. I was ordered to the left with my younger sister, Ibolia. We came to a big warehouse and we were shaved. We were so humiliated. I remember my sister, who was so young. She was so frightened. I assured her we would be okay, not to be afraid. They gave us a gray cotton dress and a pair of wooden shoes, clogs. We had to leave everything of our own in that warehouse. Finally, they ordered us into barracks. My sister was so frightened. I was too, but I couldn't show it to her. I tried to be strong. People were screaming, going crazy because we were locked in this room. No food was given to us, no water. We spent the night in this place sitting on a dirt floor. The next day, we were ordered on trains packed tightly with people. We were taken to Płaszów, a town near Krakow. We were in Płaszów from June until September 1944. There was barbed wire all around. We were counted and then sent into some barracks with bunk-like beds. No mattress, no blanket, just a layer of wood for a bed. I was completely exhausted, but I was always looking after my sister. The next day, we had to get up very early. I think they gave us some black coffee in the morning, maybe a piece of bread, and we had to stand for hours to be counted in rows. Then they ordered us to work. In the camp where we were, there was a lager commandant. The camp commander lived in a big white house, and we were ordered to build him a swimming pool. We had to carry these huge rocks and water and cement on our shoulders. This was every day. The lager commandant would sit on his porch-like patio with buckets of stones. He'd aim them at us as we walked by. We got hit lots of times. There was a German soldier with a whip at the end of the road, and if we didn't carry big enough rocks, then we got it from him. The work was so unbearable. It was so hot. The month was June. We had no water. We would come to our place at night, and then we had to stand in line again to be counted. One day, they announced that if one person was missing, every fifth person would be shot. And of course, I was horrified because I was afraid I would see my sister shot because someone was missing. Those fears were indescribable. A lot of people died there. I remember having the feeling sometimes that maybe tomorrow I would be one of those people and I wouldn't have to do this anymore. It would all end. I was there until the beginning of September 1944. The camp commander who was stoning us, I saw him many times from the barracks beat up men. He would come up, usually riding his white horse, and he would get off the horse and kick the person until he died. I saw him order some men to lie down on their stomachs on the dirt floor and walk on their elbows. They had to drag themselves along on their elbows. I saw him beating, punching until the person just went limp. He was a cruel, cruel man. I was getting thinner and thinner. I didn't have much strength, but I played strong for my sister. I forever told her that we must stay alive, we must stay well, because everybody would be home but us if we didn't hang on. I felt a certain stubbornness. I wouldn't let them destroy me. Then in September 1944, they made us get on trains, again with miserable accommodations, and they took us back to Auschwitz. I must have been there for only a day or two when they ordered us out of the barracks and tattooed our arms. E737. Then, when we got back to the barracks, they ordered us back because they had made a mistake. A half hour had gone by and they had to redo it. So we went back, and on that painful area, they crossed out the B and added A20. A20737. My arm was so swollen and painful. This was done down to the bone. It was a horrible experience, but by then it was just another part of everything. I knew we were in trouble, and I remember feeling like a zombie. I couldn't function anymore from the hunger and tiredness. They gave us some sort of fluid concoction called soup, and on top of that little bowl were worms swimming all over. But we were so hungry by that point that we just closed our eyes so we didn't see what we were eating. at least we were eating something. We had no underwear. We just had that one single dress. Every morning we had to stand in line to be counted naked. They made us stand on the street with our dress and our shoes in our hand so we could be counted. It took hours. This was done every day by SS soldiers, German soldiers. Can I tell you how humiliating that was? They were looking for blemishes, for any kind of imperfection. We stayed in Auschwitz like zombies. I was very hungry all the time. They gave us some black coffee or this concoction of liquid and a piece of bread at the end of the day. We weren't doing anything, just walking around. Nobody knew anything. It was horrible. I was there until about mid-October. About a month had gone by. One day, they ordered us to walk on some sort of a train that had no top, like you would take produce or something. We traveled a few days and wound up in Germany, in the town of Hunsfeld. Here, they put us into buildings that had something like bunk beds. It was like heaven because we had a thin blanket. We felt like we were finally treated humanely. They assigned us to work in an ammunition factory for the Germans. I was ordered to make bullets in this factory. My sister worked the night shift and I worked the day shift. We were exhausted. They woke us up early in the morning. We had to stand in line to be counted. After hours of standing in line, we had to walk to work. I knew the ammunition would be used against people whom I didn't want to hurt, so I sabotaged the work. I didn't make them the way I was supposed to. Most of the time, I got away with it, but I also got caught. I got so beat up that I lost my hearing for a long time. I was beaten in the face by a female German soldier. We were at Hunsfeld from October 1944 until the middle of January 1945. It was cold, snowing, windy. We had only that one cotton dress. One night we heard a tremendous noise outside, and then we saw light. Floaters were in the air. They lit up the whole place because we were being discovered. They bombed the factory. You can imagine how I felt. My sister was in that factory, and we heard the bombs falling all over. It was horrendous. But the people inside were taken to a shelter with the Germans, so she survived. The next day, we were told we had to leave because we had been discovered. It was mid-January 1945. We couldn't take anything. Some people wrapped the blanket under their dress. They were beaten and had to drop it. We started to walk in those wooden shoes and that single dress. One by one, people were dropping. There was no shelter, no food. We were eating snow. These young people sat down. They couldn't walk anymore, and they froze to death. Either they were left there or they were shot right in front of our eyes. I was pulling my sister and yelling at the others not to sit down, not to stop. I said, "You must help me. We have to stay together." I wanted to encourage them to hang on. We walked for 4 or 5 days in bitter cold weather. We never stopped. We were followed by SS men on horseback and in cars. I saw some of the girls just run away from the line. They probably froze on the side of the road. They just couldn't take it. But I had an attitude all the time not to let the Nazis succeed. If I died, then they would have accomplished what they wanted. I was pulling my sister. I remember pulling her just so she would not sit down. But secretly, I felt that maybe if I could fall down, then I wouldn't have to walk anymore. I didn't stay with that thought because I had a certain, not energy, but a will to survive so I could tell the world what was being done to us for no reason at all. After about 4 or 5 days of walking, we came to a place in Germany called Gross Rosen. I don't have to tell you that most of the people didn't make it. I think about 1,000 people left Hunsfeld and about 200 arrived in Gross Rosen. The rest died on the road. The Nazis had us going back and forth to different concentration camps because lots of camps were being discovered. They grabbed whoever was still available to be gotten rid of and put as many people as they could on these death marches. It was meant for torture and to end it for us. We stayed at Gross Rosen for maybe about 2 days. They gave us some black coffee or some hot liquid to drink, and it was like heaven. It gives me such a pain. I try not to think of these things in order to go on. I can't even describe the agony, the pain, the exposure to the weather, the elements, and how horrible that was. As far as hunger goes, I suffered. My stomach was just shrinking. I was in pain for food. But somehow, after a long while, I got used to not eating. I just got weak. But water, I never got used to not having. It was absent all the time. I'm trying to describe to you how bad it was. It's so difficult for me to talk about all this. I never really have, but I feel that I must do it because there are books written that deny the Holocaust ever happened. From Gross Rosen, after a couple of days, the Germans packed us tightly into transport wagons. The journey took several days. We went through towns and farms. I remember some farmers threw vegetables to us. We grabbed them. We even shared. After several days, they brought us to an overnight stop called Madhausen. That was a men's camp, and I saw men like zombies walking around aimlessly. Nobody was normal. Everybody was in another state. We weren't functioning human beings. We stayed overnight. They were trying to elude the Allies so they wouldn't know where we were. The next day, we were packed into the same open transportation cars, and again, we began traveling, I think for about 13 days. All of a sudden, it dawned on me that I hadn't eaten anything. I looked down at my leg and my arm, and they were like sticks. After about 13 days, they brought us to a most horrible camp called Bergen-Belsen in Germany. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was nothing to lie on, just a bare floor. There was no blanket, there was no bed, there was no mattress, there was nothing. Here, they didn't count us anymore. There was no water. I remember some people couldn't manage anymore without water. They drank their own urine out of a bowl. If it rained, we tried to drink whatever the ground didn't soak up. By that time, my sister was very weak. I used to go outside to see what was happening. There were dead people all over. They were just lying on the ground. And then the bodies were piled up like a farmer piles up what he harvests. The bodies were just thrown on top of each other. It was like a mountain of bodies spread out every which way. There was an arm here, a leg there, a head somewhere else. This was so devastating to see that after a while, I didn't want to go outside anymore. My sister was very sick. She had diarrhea. They had some sort of a trench that they dug nearby to go if we wanted to relieve ourselves. People just kind of squatted and aimed for the hole. There was no sanitation whatsoever to wash our hands or anything. A lot of people died from typhus. I was there for about 3 months, from the end of January until April 19th, 1945, just diminishing and disappearing. My legs looked even thinner. There was just bone. My arms were just bones. And then I couldn't walk anymore. My knees wouldn't hold me up. If I fell, I would have no way of getting up. My sister was very sick, and she became very quiet. I kept telling her to hang on because we would be okay and we would have to go home. It was always the same story to try to keep her alive. Every day I saw the Germans come into the barracks, and whoever was moving, they grabbed either by the hair or an arm or a leg, and they pulled them outside and threw them into the pile. One day, I started to break out all over my body. It was like scabs, like wounds, breaking out all over my body and in my hair. And in that flesh, that infected flesh, were living lice. They were everywhere. In our clothes, on the dresses we wore, in the seams, we were covered everywhere we looked. They were a whitish color, lice, by the millions. They were in my head, living in those infections. And the infections started to get in my mouth. I couldn't open my mouth anymore. I couldn't lift my arm. And one day, even though I couldn't hear well, I heard that something was going on outside. I crawled outside and looked up, and the sky was covered with airplanes. Hundreds of airplanes circling us. They came low, and it was very noisy. Somehow I felt that we were being discovered. So I crawled back in the barracks, and I took my sister, and somehow I pulled her real close to me. I was holding her in my arms. She couldn't hold her head up anymore. It just fell on her chest. It just hung down, but she was alive. I said to her, "Listen, Evie, There are airplanes out there. We're being discovered. In no time, we'll be taken back home to our families. Just don't get down. Stay strong and concentrate on that. And while I was telling her, she died in my arms. Then somebody came and pulled her out, and that was the end of me. I knew she was in the pile. I was all by myself. That night, soldiers came running into the barracks. They spoke to us in languages we could understand. They were telling us that they were our friends, and they were there to help us. They set up emergency hospitals and began taking people out. They told us they'd have food for us, and they would get us cleaned up. They were saying all these encouraging things, and I remember I was lying there and I thought to myself, they're not even going to take me because I'm not worth it. I'm almost not even alive anymore. But I didn't care by then. It didn't matter. I lost my sister and I couldn't encourage myself anymore. It just didn't matter. But they did take me. Once at the emergency hospital, they put me in a bed, and then 2 nurses put me in a tub filled with hot water. I couldn't hear them, and I couldn't speak either. Whatever they did to me, they did. But I remember sitting in this tub, and one nurse was holding both my hands. The other one was using a big brush like you would take for scrubbing floors. And while I was sitting in this water, she was pulling off all the scabs, all those wounds, and was cleaning them out with that brush. She had to because there was lice living in them. I was screaming. I was crying, and that nurse that was holding my hand was crying too with tears. She tried to soothe me, but she was also crying. And then, after that torture was over, they put me in bed and covered me with a yellow medicine. I was in the hospital until the beginning of July 1945. I remember having nightmares, seeing my family, talking to my father and my brother. I must have had a very high fever. I was always very cold, bitter cold. It didn't matter what they covered me with. I was just so cold. My spirit was totally gone. I couldn't handle it anymore. Then someone came. A doctor was telling me that we needed special care that they could not give us there. Europe was war-torn. He said we would go to either Switzerland or Sweden so we could get the proper care to recover. We were taken to a city named Kalmar in Sweden in July 1945. I cannot tell you enough how the Swedish people were concerned and kind and tireless. The nurses would feed me even if I didn't want to eat. By now, I weighed 54 pounds. I was 19 years old. I was a bag of bones. The nurses would tap dance for me. My hair was growing back and they would comb my hair. They would soothe me and do anything to make me feel better. They were very kind. I had to stay in the hospital for a whole year. They taught me how to walk again. After a year, I was put into a convalescent home. By then, we were encouraged to write to an organization, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to look for any siblings or anybody left in our families that may have survived. I wrote to the HIAS organization to look for my siblings. They wrote back after several months saying that I had a brother. This was known from the bookkeeping of the Germans. When I got that telegram, I was hysterical. They had to sit on me. I was just going nuts. Somehow, I found out which brother survived, Miklos. I was elated. After the convalescent home, I joined a group of girls in Jönköping, Sweden. We went to work. I was taught how to use a sewing machine. I was able to correspond with my brother, who went back to Hungary. One time, my brother wrote me a letter and sent me an address. He said the people at that address were related to us. It was my father's aunt. He said if I wanted to write to them, it would be okay. So I did. I was hoping that maybe they would answer me, and they did. My father's aunt gave my letter to her daughter, and she sent me 2 single American dollars in the letter. I felt so rich. I wrote to them thanking them for the money, and then a second letter came. She asked me if I would like to come to America. You can imagine how I felt. You can imagine my feelings, my hopes, and my dreams, that maybe, just maybe, it would come true. I wrote back, and I told them how grateful I would be if only they could just help me come there. I arrived in America on June 14th, 1948. Coming to America was a dream, an unbelievable dream. My grandmother's journey and struggles continued in America. 32 years passed before she was able to be reunited with her brother. Despite these hardships, she lived a long and happy life. You have just heard my grandmother's horrific and painful experience during the Holocaust. It took 4 interviews for her to be able to share all this information with me. It's shocking to me that, according to her, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Throughout the process of interviewing her, our bond grew stronger than words can describe. She will always be my biggest inspiration. I'm alive here today because of her grit and resilience. I owe my life to her. The extreme hatred that allowed this to happen did not start with concentration camps and gas chambers. It started with hatred, prejudice, bullying, unkindness. I share my grandmother's experience with you in hopes that she might inspire you. Go out into this world and stand up against hatred, prejudice, racism. You have the ability through your actions to make the world a better place. Let's all promise to speak out against wrongdoing. One by one, we can do our part to be accepting of others and stand up against hate. The future belongs to us. On April 29th, 2022, my grandmother recorded a message for me to play when I speak to audiences about her journey. I'll show you a few pictures and we'll play her message for you now.
Sorry. I apologize. I don't usually use this computer.
Just click, maybe?
I tried. It's not working. So this is all the Zoom.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm going to
We can skip the pictures and maybe I can just play the video.
Sure.
I have it on my phone.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I do have the slides now. Apologize.
That's fine. Okay. This is my family, my parents, my uncle, me, my brother, my sister, my grandmother.
Next.
Yeah, keep going. Yep. My mom and my grandmother, my sister, Brianna, who's here in the audience. Her dad. This is my daughter and my son here. They wanted to be a part of this presentation. He was balancing a fidget spinner on her knuckle and having a good time. Me and my grandmother. And this is 4 generations here. When she saw this picture, she said, "This is the ultimate revenge." So, okay, here's the message to you.
So is it magically going to
It's a
play?
blessing that she survived and was able to tell her story.
Hello,
And
everybody.
that
Just
you
came to say
recorded it.
hello.
That's
And
really
wish
a
you
blessing.
good life and luck and health, all of you. I hope someday can see you in person. Bye-bye.
My grandmother passed away on August 12th, 2022. She was 96 years old. Before she died, I promised her that I would spend the rest of my life sharing her experiences with others so that her memories would live on. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you for your time and for caring.
Are there any questions, folks? Just go ahead and raise your hand while I struggle back. Oh my gosh, my pleasure. I wish I was better.
No. Thank you for listening. I was really hoping I wouldn't start crying again
Oh.
during the presentation, but here we are.
Gina, did her brother stay in Hungary?
Have you met with other family members of survivors?
I have met with other family members of survivors, yes. They're few and far between now. But I have met other survivors and their children or grandchildren, yeah. And it's always a special moment for me.
Yeah.
There was a question here. The question was, did her brother stay in Hungary?
Yeah.
Okay, her brother was taken back to Hungary and then he was smuggled out of the country in a refrigerator box and he was taken to Israel. Once he was in Israel, he was put into an Orthodox place. And from that point on, he became more religious because that was where he was. And so, as I mentioned, it took 32 years for her to be reunited with him. Her first husband, my grandmother's first husband, was not a good person. But by the time she was reunited with him, he had changed a bit. And so the reunion wasn't exactly what my grandmother thought it was going to be. I think there's like certain rules about, I don't know if you could look at her or what, but it was a difficult moment. But he ended up in Israel.
When I read this book, apart from all the tragic horror, I kept thinking what an incredible strength your grandmother had, and wondered whether, when you were growing up, were you aware of what a strong person she was?
But that's a good question. Growing up, was I aware of the strength that my grandmother had? I think I didn't have a full appreciation of about what she had been through until I was in high school when I interviewed her. I remember being young and like visiting her and worrying like I didn't want the bad people to come take us like they took her. But once I found out what she had been through, and then her first marriage was awful too, it really blew my mind. And I mean, I didn't experience what she experienced. I wasn't there. I only heard her words and felt her emotions, but you can see the effect that it has on me, on people. So I do think she was incredibly strong, and I recognize it now more than ever. But until I really kind of learned what she had been through, I didn't fully recognize it. Good question.
I also have family members, and for many, the people who've been through that close up and they wouldn't speak about it at all because of the horrible memory. How did you actually get to a point where she would openly talk about it, and was it?
Okay, the question is, oftentimes survivors are not able to speak due to the trauma that they have been through, and how was I able to get to a place where she was willing to share with me? First of all, I didn't know the trauma that she would go through to share with me. Had I known that, I probably wouldn't have pursued it. She also didn't tell me she was getting sick or anything like that. I didn't know at the time. And I mean, Steven Spielberg, I think he was offering survivors like $500 or something to interview them. And she said, no, I can't. But for me, she didn't say no. So, and then it was very difficult to interview her. I was trying to ask her questions to get the information without asking anything that was too painful. She was trying to share the information with me without saying anything that would be too painful. And so we're kind of like dancing around this situation while trying to get it out there. It was very difficult. It was difficult for her to see. This was just a school project. I just asked her if I could interview her. We didn't know it was going to be.
And how did you come to know that she had actually experienced everything to even get through the point that you wanted to interview her?
I knew she was a Holocaust survivor, even in 5th grade. I knew. I told my teachers when we started to learn about it. Our class came up with questions, but it's like, what was the weather like? What did you eat? It was like totally appropriate for 5th grade. And then in high school, I learned a little bit more about the Holocaust. And it wasn't until college that I took some classes just to learn a little more, and it really sparked my interest. And I recognized I don't know the details of what she had been through. So that's why I asked her, not really knowing what it would do. And it was very, very difficult for her to see the words in print, but eventually she was so grateful because I can go places and share her words and she didn't have to. Sometimes she would come with me and we would agree, you're not going to say anything, you're just going to walk in at the end, people can see you. And she would always start talking, always. And she was so well spoken, people were always so moved by her. So it was always so meaningful, and then she'd suffer after. So eventually her doctor said, whatever you did, stop doing it. It's hurting her.
There are many touching scenes in the book, but one of them that touched me very deeply is what she had to endure even after she was freed. The removal of the lice from her body, having to go through every part of her body to remove the lice. One nurse had to hold her hand while the other one was removing, So I look at this and I say, how can human beings inflict such pains as the Germans did during World War II? And, and just simply the survival mode, what she had to do to survive, it had to be a real will.
Yeah.
Because you might imagine letting yourself go and say, I'd rather die than continue to feel all this pain.
Yes. I think being there with her sister
Pardon?
I think having her sister there with her was her drive. They had to survive.
So I would imagine that many might have survived that didn't, because the whole idea of surviving such pain, extreme pain.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how your grandmother was able to relay this information in such detail, including the dates and the times and the places. Do you know if she kept a diary or something?
There was a prayer book that was given to her after the war, and she wrote down her siblings' name, their birthdays, all of that stuff. The Nazis kept incredible records, and so they had very detailed information about where they had been. And she says, I was there until about mid-October. She probably didn't have everything exactly right, but this was a year of her life that she spent going from place to place, some places for a couple days, some places for longer. And other people in audiences that I've spoken to have also commented on the vivid details that she's able to recount. I at the time I had like a cassette tape. I just tape recorded her so that she could just speak freely, and I took notes and then I typed up everything she said. And with this audience, I speak her words because I think it's most powerful. When I go to schools, depending on the grade of the students, I take a lot of these details out. And with the young ones, I keep it more like story format, like she went here until here, I don't speak her words, and I have to leave things out because I have to keep it, appropriate. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've ever met with or studied the perpetrators, the ordinary Hungarians who would throw rocks at a neighbor.
If I met them, I didn't know. I'm okay with that. I really try. I mean, you see this has an effect on me sharing, and I'm so incredibly grateful each and every time I get a chance to speak to people. I always have a tissue in my pocket just in case this happens where I break down, but I try to really just focus my efforts on sharing her words, and usually the feedback I get is very kind. So I really just focus on moving forward and educating people, sharing her words. If I go to a place that's, on the flip side, it's not so good for me because I struggle with this.
I'm thinking more about the idea that ordinary people who were friendly with their neighbors, you know, the myth that emerged afterwards was that, oh, only the Nazis did that stuff.
Right.
Most Germans wouldn't participate, or most Hungarians wouldn't participate.
Yeah,
But in fact,
they were all people, all human beings.
and some of them flipped into
Yeah.
something like monsters when they
Yeah.
were originally.
There were a lot of layers to this. You know, there was fear among them too. There was punishment if you didn't turn someone in, if you didn't. This wasn't something that happened overnight. You know, and I feel like it's truly fascinating that something like this could happen. Horrific, upsetting, but it's very it's interesting too. But yeah, I think you could delve into that also. It's a good point.
So to her point, I'm a youngian. I'll call myself a youngian, because when you start to understand the shadow, there's a lot of things that could be there. So I grew up in a Quaker town, and the education that I was given, just in the public education, was amazing. I'm 49. Sorry, it's hard for me to say this because I'll be 50 in August. But my middle school social studies teacher, his parents, his family, there were some Holocaust survivors there, and the way he educated us, it wasn't just sharing a story, but he made sure that it stuck with us. So he, in old school, would write, we'd come in and he'd have notes written on the board. And that was his way of demonstrating to us, if I did it, you can do it too. So we took notes that way. Now that I'm older, I understand that that was the best way to make sure their story stuck with us. And my family, my parents, being of the silent generation, being African American, being from the segregated South, as I'm stories, they're comparing it and sharing their stories with us too. So I'm to, compare and contrast, and to hear how the train showed up, and to know that they were, trains that had been used for cattle, reminds me of chattel slavery. So I'm able to make those connections. And I just grew up thinking we would never let stuff like this happen again. I just grew up like, we'll never let it happen again. So for us to be here, it hurts because this isn't new. And what a lot of people forget is that Hitler borrowed from the American playbook, the Jim Crow laws. They forget that. And I can't forget it because I was taught not to forget it. And I appreciate that teacher so much for what he did. And I wanted to say to you, when you have experienced that type of trauma, it is amazing what the brain goes into it. Because I haven't journaled a lot of this stuff. Honestly, I'm afraid to. Because my story is a painful, but it's here, and I've started getting it out. And like you, I'm sharing stories now because people need to know. I'm a descendant of Stephen Hopkins. I'm a descendant of the Mayflower Pilgrims. I am very American, yet my existence just frightens people. It scares people, and it's like I'm okay with leaning into that because I know that we're human. And since I'm a youngin', I understand that I'm facing people's shadows a lot. But it's not gonna stop me from letting my light shine. And I'm gonna keep talking, I'm gonna keep connecting the dots because it should be. And I thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm Jewish by faith, so we got a lot to talk about. And just thank you. And to know that she lived till 96, I got a lot of work to do because I wanna live that long too. So thank you.
Thank you.
What do you think she would say to us today in terms of what we should be?
Oh, thank you for caring. Thank you for listening. I mean, you could go down the whole political route, but we'll save that. You know, she's not here, and I'll say that I'm grateful that she's not here to witness a lot of the things that are happening today. But when she was alive, I always called her after these talks, and I told her about the questions the audience had, the feedback they gave, you know, how they responded, and she was always so grateful. She carried a lot of guilt at not being able to speak herself, so it gave her great comfort to know that people cared and were listening, and so I think she would be truly moved and grateful for this audience tonight too.
Just want to say, thank you for sharing the story, and thank you for keeping your grandma's legacy alive. And it's a generation, that's, as the new generation, we forget what the price they pay to keep our freedom.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm only here because of the fight because of her determination, her will to survive. So as hard as it is at times, it's so worth it, and it makes me feel good to know that I can share her words with others. So thank you. Yes.
Can you share the end of her first marriage, like how strong she was at that
Okay.
point?
Her first husband was not a good person. He was abusive. The only thing I really know about him is what my grandmother told me, because my mom doesn't even speak about him. But when my mom was about 13 years old, when she was like old enough to stay home alone, my grandmother started secretly taking hairdresser classes. She found a comb on the ground in the concentration camp at one point, and she kept it with her. And everybody's heads and bodies were shaved, but she used to comb the hairs as they grew back. And it made them feel human. Later in life, she ended up becoming a hairdresser. She secretly took these classes. As soon as she got her diploma, she got a job, she got a lawyer, she got a divorce. And eventually she ended up remarrying someone who I knew as Grandpa. Sam was his name, and he was a wonderful man. So she did end up having a happy marriage eventually. And did that answer your question? How the first marriage was not good, yeah. And that the man who I know as Grandpa, he's the reason why she was reunited with her brother. He said, you need to see your brother. And he's the one that made that happen. Great questions. I can share if we have just a couple more minutes. When my grandmother was alive, she gave me something that she wrote in a hospital, and it was written in Hungarian. And she said, I don't want to translate it. If you can get someone else to do it, it would be better. I can't go to that place in my life. And I said, sure, no problem. So I kept it with me. And I was like, where am I going to find someone to translate this? It was like written in part pen, part pencil. It's a little smudgy. And I even gave my husband's cousin, Hitesh is here, and he was like, give me a copy of it and I'll see. He was working on it. Well, eventually I ended up meeting someone, a friend who is from Hungary, who lives in Morristown. And he said, I'll translate this for you. And I said, okay, but he happens to be a physician, a surgeon. He's very busy, and I didn't want to bother him, but I had a hand issue. So I went over to see him, and his mom was there. And he said, did I ever translate that thing for you? And I said, no, I felt bad asking, but I can go get it. So I gave it to him, and I gave it and his mom. And I spent just a couple minutes with her, just talking about my grandmother, and then I left it with them. And I said, no rush, but whenever is convenient, I'd be grateful. So his mom, she translated it, and then she had to go back to Hungary because her friend was sick. And so my friend, because you made a Zoom, a flyer about today, my husband, my sister posted it online, and the wife of this friend saw it and was like, you gotta get this to Shana. She's talking tomorrow. So I went over to his house last night and I got the information. I'll share a little bit with you. It's something that I've never shared with anybody because I literally got it last night. I got home at 11:30 p.m. And it's a very rough translation. He said the Hungarian language has a lot of depth to it. And some of the words he wasn't totally sure. He's like, I gotta talk to my mom about this. But I'll share just a little bit with you, just a couple lines. She wrote this in the hospital in Hungary. And she wrote it in like rhyme format, so it kind of rhymed. So I'll just say a little bit. Already 2 years that they kidnapped me from home. God, what will happen to me? Do I still have parents, siblings? You would be able to tell me. If I have to be disappointed, I'm not sure I would survive. It's only the hope that nourishes me. God, allow my soul to be happy again. Oh, how much torture I've endured in my life. Not only the rest, but the German concentration camps alone. Countless times I was soaking, frozen, starved, and cried. It is so unfortunate that I didn't even have a paper then to write things down. I'll stop there. It's just a snippet, but we still have to work on it a little bit just to get, but it's something.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
Oh,
listening.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It means the world to me. Thank you. I don't cry every time, but there was something. This is the first time that so it just, I know, I get like,
Oh yeah, I didn't realize that. It's funny, I was just telling them that.
I saw that.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Cousin.
Oh my goodness.
I saw
You'll
their
get all
names
this.
on here.
But let me turn this on and we'll get it all to you.
Thank you so much.
Jada, I really, I not just wonder, you know, we know that atrocities occur in prison whenever somebody is in prison or somebody says, you know, here, he's not often bad guys, but they don't deserve it. Actually, sign the language. Nobody deserves that. It's like I don't want to know.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful to you for writing that story, which must have been a very painful experience.
It was not easy, but she did the hard part. I just typed up what she said.
But no, but that was not
I just want to say, I don't remember.
Thanks for taking over because I wasn't supposed to do this. Rich was supposed to do it. So I got to prepare another.
The reason I remember that is the battle that was
What's that? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she really described the effect that hole had on her.
it's like today, you know, California, that was the way in those days. You know, I remember the soldier was saying that, you know, the Germans were well dressed, the Americans were not. I think she's got that competitive spirit on the tennis court.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
bad leader can inspire people, as a good leader can. Pardon? Oh, that's why I want to. Are you willing to march on Washington? No? Have you shoes? I didn't know that.